You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com. Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to Permanent Associates. I'm your host, Randy Perm. Hey, I hope you all had a great weekend and all that good stuff, and ready to get into another exciting week ahead. And so, I have a very special guest with us today, and I'm really excited to have a conversation with them. And without further ado, I am going to introduce you all to Mr. Lloyd Richardson. He is a diplomat. He was a diplomat during the Reagan years and a lawyer with global clients for over 20 years. Lloyd Richardson brings 3 decades of experience in international affairs to his writing on American intelligence. He is a fluent. He's fluent, in Chinese and has held diplomatic posts abroad and at the State Department, where his last assignment was as staff assistant to the director of the Secretary of State's policy planning staff. He has previously written on America's foreign policy towards Asia for a publication of the Hoover Institution's Policy Review. Mr. Richardson has served as an advisor to the U.S. government with respect to infrastructure development in emerging market countries. He has traveled through much of Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, the Caribbean, the Central America in that capacity, and spent a year in Nairobi as a resident advisor to the Kenyan government. Mr. Richardson practiced law in the D.C. area for many years, advising clients on infrastructure projects, investments, and corporate matters. Most recently, Mr. Richardson has served for over a decade as counsel to CASA 1000, an energy transmission project linking Central and South Asia. He was named Best Lawyers in America for nearly a decade and is accomplished in alternative dispute resolution. Mr. Richardson obtained his JD degree from Columbia University, where he was an editor for the Journal of Transitional Law. He holds an MPA in International Economic Development from the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. He obtained his AB with honors from Brown University, where he completed a double major in Asian history and Western political theory. In high school, he was a recipient of the Brown Book Award for Excellence in English. Mr. Richardson lives with his loving wife and possibly devoted cat in North Carolina, where he moved for detox after 20 years spent sucking the hot air in D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to some and introducing to others, Mr. Lloyd Richardson. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome.
Randy, how are you today?
I am doing well, sir. Doing well. Very impressive background and bio. I wish I had the opportunity to do as half of the things that you have done during my time in the military, but I still have fun though. But yours is one to marvel over, indeed.
Well, you're young yet, Randy. You have plenty of runway ahead of you.
True. I'm working on it. I want to jump into talking about BRICS for a moment. Brazil,
Right.
Russia, India, China, South America alliance there. And it's one of my favorite topics I like to discuss when talking to folks that's in the Chinese expertise arena. Uh, the China Russia relationship that is growing stronger as the Russia Ukraine war is ensuing by the day. And we see NATO and the U.S. are kind of doing this soft power flexing with sending weapons and economic support to Ukraine. So many people are thinking that you know this is a proxy war between actually the United States or Western powers against Russia, and China is kind of like just hanging out on the sidelines. I want to get your thoughts on what's going on here with this intricate relationships, and will it lead to a World War III or Cold War type of thing?
Well, thank you, Randy. I don't. This may be one of the few international situations in the world today that we can't actually blame on China. Almost everything else, but not that. I believe that China is benefiting from the war, however, in a couple of ways.
Mm,
There's obviously been a little bit of tension created within NATO through the course of this conflict. Um, so that's obviously always to China's benefit. The other point is that I think they've gained some substantial leverage with Russia. The Chinese have.
yeah.
Because obviously, as economic ties have been cut off with the West for Russia, Putin has obviously seen fit to turn to replace that trade to China. So China's benefiting from it in a couple of ways. But I
Mm,
have to say, in my own view, the situation in Ukraine is one of our own making. And I say of our own, I mean the United States. For some reason, during the Obama administration, and some people may not realize it goes back to that era, there were a group of policymakers who thought it was a great idea to try to incorporate Ukraine into NATO,
mm-hmm.
which, to my sense, is probably not the smartest move in the world. Uh, Russia has a long-standing historic interest in access to the Black Sea
Yeah.
because of its proximity in the north to really only to the Arctic. So for them, to have warm water ports and those things have been with the Russian mentality for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly that doesn't mean that the West can't have a good relationship with Ukraine, but I have to say that bringing them into NATO, not to this is not to suggest that Putin didn't launch this war. I'm not saying he's not to blame
Right.
for it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but certainly if you were going to take a provocative act where Putin was concerned, this was certainly one of them.
I agree with you on that assessment. My time, I spent a few years in NATO myself, and in the Russia Ukraine uh, scenario popped up quite often in some discussions with regards to Crimea and what if Russia tries to invade, and lo and behold, after I retire, guess what happens? Russia invades. So
Exactly.
I think there was some animus there with the waiting on the right administration, the U.S. administration, to come through to do this. But more so, I see it as Russia, like you just said, trying to secure their accessibility to the Black Sea by disrupting the eligibility requirements for Ukraine, which is now we see NATO is scrambling to kind of like waive a lot of these requirements to go ahead and just drag Ukraine into it, so that there's no more future incursions. Do you think that will work if that comes to fruition?
It's hard to see how it does, Randy. One of the things that well, there are a lot of things you could say about Putin, and by the way, I don't mean to discount Russia as a threat to U.S. interest by any means. But I guess I really am very concerned about escalation in Ukraine.
Mm.
Putin, both the Chinese and Putin seem to be preparing themselves mentally for the use of nuclear weapons in a tactical military sense.
I agree.
So, how is this a good result? I mean, where can this go that doesn't aggravate things?
Hmm. You're absolutely right, and I do see a further escalation and aggression that's being provided by the United States or I would say the Western powers collectively, because uh, President Zelensky, asked the United States for an additional $24 billion just a few days ago, and then you have, I guess there's some posturing going on because the Chinese Defense Minister Ling Shangfu visited Russia, and Belarus, and I guess they're trying
Right.
to, say, okay, what are these guys doing now, type of thing, and do we need to start intervening in this since they're still pumping money and weapons into Ukraine against you guys?
Right.
Do we need to get involved? And that's why I keep telling some of my colleagues is that this is where I see that's going to end up happening. Right now they're playing the look over here with Taiwan, but I think Taiwan is going to be fine for now, and that they need to close the chapter on what's going on with Ukraine in order to either deter or provoke the Western alliance into another war. And I just wanted to get your thoughts about that as well.
Well, of course, with China, there are a couple of offsetting factors, I think, with China. One is that I think they feel very comfortable with the current administration in Washington, in the sense that they believe the Biden administration may not respond strongly anywhere in the world
Mm-hmm.
where the U.S. is provoked. So that in itself is problematic to me. On the other hand, China has traditionally tried to, they believe in this concept of total war. But the
Yes.
biggest aspects of that war, from their perspective, is not the military kinetic part.
Mm-hmm.
It's the social, it's the economic, it's the trade, it's the cultural attacks
Yes.
where they feel they have a distinct advantage. So,
Mm-hmm.
does it really serve China's even short term interests to to escalate in Ukraine? Uh, they seem to be doing really well without doing that in terms of undermining U.S. interests around the world. And perhaps if they turn it into a kinetic situation, uh, they look less like the good guy, the impartial arbiter of justice, if you will, in
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine. Uh, and maybe it's easier for the West to coalesce in some kind of resistance to them. So it's hard to see how this plays out well. Is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and you're right. That I do see China trying to remain, appears appearing to be unbiased, but they're kind of like players in the background because they too are supplying funding and weapons to Russians as well, and many. Uh, I want to turn our attention to because you said something very key there about how China is kind of like just playing, in the background in a sense. But there's
Right.
also this concern that the Chinese government is buying U.S. land and farmlands in the U.S. And we are wondering why is that this is one of our greatest adversaries in the world and the Congress at least is allowing this to happen. But although there have been some members of Congress that introduced some legislation here a couple of weeks back to prohibit China from buying land, but the Biden administration seemed to be kind of like turning a blind eye to it and threatened to veto this move. But I want to get your thoughts on that aspect of things.
Yeah, that's a very interesting phenomenon. I agree, Randy, for a couple of reasons. One of the most positive things about this issue, the agricultural lands, is that we see state legislatures now taking action to bar
Mm-hmm.
Chinese acquisition of land.
Yeah.
So although states can only be so effective when it comes to foreign policy matters, certainly there are states that now are trying to take the initiative here and have done so. So
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. This ought to be something that is handled in Washington, but under this administration, I doubt we can expect that. But there are two aspects to these land acquisitions. If you stop and think about it, it seems to be that a lot of the news stories that you see about this like to highlight the fact that this land may be located near sensitive military installations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's certainly one aspect of it. But the other aspect that I think your listeners need to keep in mind here is that one of the reasons China wants to do this isn't just for espionage purposes. I think they really have a huge problem with food and water in their own country. They are a massive importer of foodstuffs just to feed their own population.
Mm-hmm.
So some of what
Yeah.
they're doing, I believe, is a hedge long term. They're trying to make sure they have access to agricultural commodities that they will desperately need at some point, especially if relations with the West continue to deteriorate. And let's face it, the weakest aspect of China is its economy. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me, that's really the Achilles heel of the Chinese Communist Party. They have this massive population, and and people need to remember that out of that 1.5 billion people, perhaps only 300 or 400 million are actually engaged in what you and I would think of as the modern industrial economy. The other billion plus are still living in out, in a peasant lifestyle in the rural
Mm-hmm.
areas in conditions that are no better than they were 100 years ago. So there is this bifurcation within Chinese society, all of which creates enormous pressure on the Chinese Communist Party to score a few wins from time to time.
You said something I like right now because it just actually linked into my next question. And in the 1940s and early 70s, through the early 70s rather, the Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong, he had this program called the Great Leap Forward, and that resulted in killing hundreds of 100 million plus people through impoverishment and what have you. And we're looking at when he died, the Chinese economy tried to shift, do a gradual shift to, okay, we see communism is not totally working here in socialism, so we're going to do a mixed market type of thing. And they've been
Right,
branching out, over the last 3 4 decades, trying to incorporate this thing slowly, and we're still
right.
seeing, famine, and poverty, high rates of poverty in China, just as you mentioned. But I'm wondering, how does the Belt and Road, if the Chinese economy is so bad and they're in financial dire straits, how is it that the Chinese are able to engage or deploy their Belt and Road initiative around the world, suckering in? That's why I say, they're suckering in these other countries to be beholden to them by building up their infrastructure when they can't even take care of their own.
Well, part of that answer is, of course, they don't. Their repression is so severe that they can afford to keep their own people at a very low level of subsistence, and it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
A few million here, a few million there. They don't really care that much about their own people.
Yeah.
I mean, let's remember that this Chinese Communist Party killed 80 million of their own people just in the first 25 years they came to power in 1949. Right, from
Yeah.
then until the the uh, the mid 60s. Uh, but I guess the other aspect of this, Randy, is that uh, it's important for people to understand. It's one of the reasons I think Trump really was making some smart moves with this issue, of so-called fair free trade. We have sold ourselves on this illusion that free trade is a great thing. But the truth is, it's been very bad for us strategically. And it's important for people to understand
Mm,
that the dollars that the Chinese take in every year from their trade deficit with us, in other words, they have the advantage. We are in the deficit, not the Chinese. But their
mm-hmm.
earnings from this trade, they turn right around and recycle. We used to talk about it in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia, what they call petrodollars. Well, these are trade dollars. All these dollars they earn from the United States, they turn right around and use to buy influence
Yeah.
in other countries around the world and at the UN,
Mm,
to
mm-hmm.
corrupt and
Yep.
subvert Western institutions. So we are, in a sense, not in a sense, we are directly funding their global aggression against us.
Huh. I didn't think of it that way. Well, I should say I didn't think of it that way. I didn't. That didn't pop into my mind. Let me put it like that. I didn't see it from that angle. But you're absolutely right. The way that they're flexing the trade, uh, and the wow, that's that's interesting. And the United
Well,
States is
and
just
and
sitting back
and
and just taking it on the chin like it's no big deal.
and stroking the checks.
Yes,
But
yes.
the other aspect of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a deplorable initiative,
Mm-hmm.
by the
It
way. I
is.
mean, this has impacted me personally for the last 20 years at, at the business level, and I've watched this go on in Africa and Central Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, it's about gaining advantage over local governments and Western interests in these emerging markets. But I think part of the problem too is you may have noticed that since 2020, they have actually toned down or slowed the pace at which they're rolling out a lot of the
Oh
projects that
yes.
they've been promising.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
clearly, there is a cash flow problem there. Without that free money to fund these projects, um, it's a real problem. I'm working currently and have over the past year or so in Pakistan, and this is one of the from a strategic point of view, this is a very troubling development. But they have this aspect of of Belt and Road Initiative specific to Pakistan called CPEC, was the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the map, it's very clear what they're doing. I mean, they're building roads and railroads. They want to be able to get access to the Indian Ocean and bypass Southeast Asia because they're doing it for strategic reasons to encircle India.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so their relationship with Pakistan is extremely troubling, and yet we continue to have that's. I don't know if people realize this. USAID, our development agency, its single largest mission today, as we sit here, is still in Pakistan. So we have this almost Cold War style competition going on in
Mm.
Pakistan,
Yeah. With the
with
correct.
the United States and China vying for who can leverage the local political situation.
Yeah, I see that as well, and it's interesting to me because Italy is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. And I would not have thought, or thunk it, I should say, I like to say, I would have thunk that Italy, of all of the European nations, would have acquiesced to China in this regard. And then we're seeing now, in the last couple of years, just as you mentioned, the scaling back of China's ambitious expansionism in the African markets. The African countries, the Eastern African countries, are starting to rescind or cancel contracts with China as well, and they're turning to Russia, which I find a little strange because they've been having like a little kumbaya session these last few weeks. The African nations and Russia, and then I could get into the coup in Niger. The last couple of weeks, and it seemed like Russia has a hand in that just to piss off France, and so there's a lot of things going on there. That I try to talk to my friends about these stuff, and they just kind of give me a deer in the headlight look, like, huh? So
Oh,
it's a lot.
it's every bit as hot as it was during the Cold War.
Yeah.
I want to flag two things that what you just said about Italy. understand that China is currently one of the biggest manufacturers in Milan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They during the recent decade, and if you go back to the beginning of COVID in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
you may remember that Italy suffered the highest death rates of
Yes.
any country in Europe.
I was
To
living there
my
at the
mind,
time.
that were
I was
you?
yeah.
So I'm
I was
thinking
living
it
there.
had to
Yeah.
do with all those Chinese folks who were traveling from China in and out of Milan and other parts of Italy.
Yeah.
I don't think that was an accident. I mean, do people say, "Oh, well, they had an older population in Italy"? I
No.
don't think
No.
so.
No.
I think we know how that happened.
I 100% agree with you, Lloyd, because I was I was living in Naples during from 2017 to 2020. I lived in Italy in Naples, and I was
Nice,
just so happened to be up in Vicenza, up north.
right?
Milan is about I want to say an hour train ride or something or another to the east there, and I was in Vicenza for some training that week, and yes, the outbreak of COVID. At first, it wasn't called COVID. They didn't know what it was at first. They just thought it was like a real bad flu, and I even caught a little bit of it. But in that area, there is a very hot, heavy Asian influence because I talked to some people, some shop owners that was actually from Korea as well, and so but there is a very heavy Asian influence in the north of Italy. So I don't, and I didn't link the two until much later. But when the bodies are dropping left and right, and we got put on lockdown when I returned back to Naples, that it was a lot of that conversation did come up. I was in the headquarters at NATO, and that conversation did come up that it could have been a possible infiltration to disrupt NATO operations. It was kind of like they was kind of looking at it from that perspective as utilizing human
Right.
vectors to spread the disease, and it kind of got like dismissed because then it started going to talks of being a xenophobic and everything else. But that theory was out there, so you're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
Speaking speaking of which, you take that same issue. Now talk about Africa for a second. In
Mm-hmm.
2012, I happened to be on a flight from Angola back to Nairobi, and I got on this flight, and it was a flight internal to Africa,
Yep.
right? Um, and I'll bet you that two-thirds of the passengers on that plane were Chinese.
Mm.
So, if any, and when you fly into Luanda, and I don't think it's probably changed, but in 2012, so about 10 years ago, when you flew into Luanda on the west coast of Africa, so this isn't facing even Asia, right? Um, the construction cranes were all over the city. There could have been 25 of them, right? All Chinese construction companies.
Mm.
And this, of course, what the other part of this that I'll mention to you that I think you might find interesting is when I was living in Nairobi in 2011 and 2012, the local people, man in the street, thought very highly of the Chinese because they were coming in and they were actually doing things, delivering roads, delivering bridges,
Mm-hmm.
delivering rail. Uh, but 10 years on, if you go back and talk to those same people today, that opinion has
Change.
turned
Yeah.
180 degrees because people have caught on to the
Yeah.
scam.
Yeah, yeah. No, I could totally see that. I got a couple of friends that's over in Nigeria, and one of them is actually he's a host on this network. He comes on after me, and him and I we discuss these things quite a bit on the influence that Chinese they had, and then it deteriorated really fast. And so there's a lot of, I guess you could say, sabotaging operations that's going on there, in certain parts of West Africa to deter the Chinese from to continue their development projects there. So it's interesting. It's like, huh, that's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys better be careful. So, you you have a trilogy out, and I want to touch on all three of them because I said, wow, this is interesting. The first one you have is entitled Dragon's Paw. What first I want to ask you, what was your genesis or the brainchild behind this trilogy set, and then you could talk about Dragon's Paw.
Yeah. So I got so frustrated during the Obama administration, Randy, that I decided I needed to write some spy books so people could start to see how pervasive the Chinese influence was out in the world, because that administration, just like the Biden administration, was just, I'm sorry, so inept in foreign policy and so engaged in wishful thinking and so leftist. How else to say it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's when I wrote the first one, and the main character is an American who ostensibly works for the State Department named Adam Chin. But the long story short, he gets involved in all these situations. The first one, Dragon's Paw, is actually set in Pakistan, and involves a Chinese invasion there. So I mean, they're just supposed to be good yarns, but I try not to. In all three of them, I try to highlight for people who the other players are and how pervasive, again, the Chinese are
Yeah.
in these places. Dragon's Paw, by the way, is intended to be a play on the term cat's paw, which I felt our president at the time was being where China was concerned. So,
Okay. Okay.
yes.
Okay. And so this, the same with launch code and the other one here,
7 Days in
7
August
days
is
in
the one
August.
that just came out. As I say, the first one, Dragon's Paw, was set in Pakistan and India. Launch code was set in primarily in Iran and Turkey, and then starts out in Central Asia. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third one, in fact, is about the deployment of a nuclear device by terrorists in Nairobi, because I thought that would be a good way to bring it home.
Yeah.
People lose sight of the fact that there are over 1 million expatriates living in Nairobi at any point in time.
Yeah.
So the West actually is very vulnerable there to terrorism, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes forgotten.
Yeah.
We forget, right? 1998, two of our embassies were bombed there.
Yep.
So it's to kind of honor that legacy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good deal. Good deal. Yeah. I'm looking forward to picking these three up and checking it out. I'm working on a book called China Hand right now by another guest that I had, and it he talks about a Chinese general's defection to the United States and how he assisted in that operation. So it was a pretty interesting storyline going on. So I
Nice.
see a lot of that happening as well. And I want to get your thoughts on that. Is there is a lot of defection coming out of China and coming into the U.S. And I want to get your thought. Is it really defection or is it a psyop operation in your opinion?
Yes. Is the
That's what.
short answer.
Yeah,
Rem-
that's what I
Remember,
thought.
China has almost 400,000 graduate students here in the United States in any given year, right?
Yes.
Those people turn over all the time, so they're cycling millions of people through our university system. Most of those people end up staying in the United States, unfortunately, and ending up in our companies in some form of employment, usually in the science and technology fields. So
Mm-hmm.
to
Yes.
me, this is just another. I don't mean to point fingers at people just because of where they come from. Obviously, many of these people want to become loyal Americans, and many have. If you look at the Epic Times, for example, many of the people who were behind starting that newspaper came out of Hong Kong and other
Mm-hmm.
parts of China as refugees of one kind or another. So
Yep.
they understand the value of freedom when they run from it, from the situation in China. So I don't mean to discount those folks, but clearly, if you're someone who has family left in China and you end up in a sensitive place in a technology company somewhere in the United States, you're subject to pressure. You are
Yeah.
vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
to espionage, no doubt.
Yeah. And I ain't gonna say suspicion, but I kind of like had that in the back of my head. It's like there's just man, it just doesn't make sense because we start getting into looking at the growth of intellectual property theft and the mimicking of technology and it's just so many different things. It's just kind of like it's not coincidental. This is like all by
No.
design, but whose design would be the question. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that question, get your thoughts on that. It's to confirm my my biasness there. So, but I want to get your final thoughts. Share with us any final thoughts you may have, and tell us how people can support and follow you.
Yes. Oh, thanks very much, Randy. I have a website, lloydrichardson.com. And one of the things, in addition to being a platform to sell my books, your viewers can also download for free a white paper that I've done on the China situation, which talks about some of the history of this relationship as well as what the United States needs to be doing. Two or three dozen things really that need to be done sooner than later by Congress and by others to move us to a more secure footing to
Hmm.
take on this strategic competitor that China clearly is.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, Lloyd, thank you so much for joining me today once again.
Well, thank you, Randy. I enjoyed it. I appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you, and I look forward to having you back on again soon. So, be safe out there, and God bless.
God bless you too, and thank you so much, Randy. Thanks for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. That was Lloyd Richardson. Hey, that was a phenomenal conversation. I got to tell you, and very brilliant. I tried to I try to cover a lot of different areas that's going on around not only the world but with China in the world, and try to make that I guess you could say semi comprehensive as I could in the short time that we have together because it was very important. I want to get a lot of that information out there, from another perspective. Because I talk about these things, on my social media, on this show, and things like that. People kind of just, glazes over their eyes or over their ears, and it's kind of like, I don't understand what he's talking about. But there are some intricate parts being moved amongst us, and it affects us daily. And like I just we were just discussing about the Chinese buying the U.S. farmlands in the United States here, and how the Belt and Road Initiative amongst other countries around the world where they're saying, hey, you pay us to come in and build your infrastructure and do these roads and bridges and what have you. You pay us to do that, but at the in the grand scheme of things, it's being done so that they will have access to these resources and to these other locations, and and then all the while, these countries are still beholden to China in the form of paying them for these construction costs so that China could utilize these bridges and roads in their country. It's crazy. And so, but then we look at their involvement with the war between Russia and Ukraine, BRICS, the growing alliance there. Although it's five, four, five, what is it, four? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America. Five, South, it's five, primary countries. But there's actually more countries that are looking to join BRICS. And some actually have already started the process of formalizing their membership into the BRICS organization, such as Argentina and I want to say it was gosh, can't remember the other country, but it's another South American country basically. And so there's a lot of that that's going on, and we're sitting back, on our laurels and ignoring all these things because it doesn't affect our 9 to 5 per se. It doesn't affect what type of cereal we're gonna eat tomorrow morning for breakfast, and it doesn't affect right now, our gas prices, although it is because the way the gas markets, the fuel markets are right now, the oil markets rather, I should say, the oil markets is right now, Saudi Arabia is looking to, kind of ditch the idea of, working with the United States, and OPEC is kind of like, yeah, we're getting tired of the U.S. with this. So, Russia, is a mass producer, relatively closer to us, and whatnot. So we can, formulate a economic partnership to increase production, lower prices, but we can still yield a profit. And so and it cuts the United States out. The dollar, the U.S. dollar, is already under heavy scrutiny around the world as it is. So and with the formation of BRICS, this BRICS alliance, they're going to create their own currency system and close out or lock out the rest of the non-conformists. that's part of the trade apparatus around the world. So there's a lot of things that's going on. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces that people don't pay attention to, and this is why these countries, these organizations, get away with these things. It's because no one's paying attention, no one's sounding the alarm, no one's talking about it. Really, you have your silos of intellectuals that's within these domains that have these discussions, but I'm talking about the discussions on the larger front. And that's not being had, by people like everyday people like you and I. You just don't see that conversation taking place in Starbucks or at Black Rifle Coffee. You just not. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. So I don't know, but folks, we're gonna jump to a commercial break real quick. Keep it locked right here, and see you in a couple minutes. You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com.
In 1729, a passionate and eager to learn young man named Benjamin Franklin bought the one-year-old Pennsylvania Gazette, and in a short period of time was able to turn it into a major connection and information center for people in the colonies. He also created a massive opportunity for businesses to advertise and grow their business in ways they couldn't previously do.
The power of the press was finally in the hands of the people. Information was able to spread fast and people began to feel more connected than ever. It was their news, their freedom, and most likely nothing they would have expected to see, or quite frankly nothing they would be very proud of seeing or hearing what it has become now in 2021.
The House manager spoke about rhetoric, about a constant drumbeat of heated language.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
You gotta be ready to throw a punch. You have to be ready to throw a punch.
Donald Trump, I think you need to go back and punch him in the face.
That I thought he should have punched him in the face.
I feel like punching. When we were in high school, I'd take you behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
No, I wish we were in high school, I could take him behind the gym.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
Exhibit here. Give me a break. Give me a large break here.
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump.
When was the last time an actor assassinated the president?
about blowing up the White House. And it is ironic that you're sitting here and you're having 3 Caucasian people testify and tell you what their expertise are. Do I know what my expertise are? Black in America. I've been Black in America my whole life, all 30 years. And I can tell you that you guys have done the exact same thing every 4 years ahead of an election cycle, and it needs to stop.
I'll yield back.
Mammoth Nation is the discount club for conservatives. You get great discounts on name brand products and services, and the proceeds help candidates who support the right causes. Plus, the money you save from just one purchase can pay for your entire membership. Liberal Democrats are destroying America, and we can't let Joe Biden be president. It's time to join the fight. Strength in numbers. We give the silent majority a resounding voice. Go to MammothNation.com and let's win this fight together.
You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com. Hey, welcome back. You know, I made a post on social media the other day, and it was on the very day that the Wagner Group members, leaders, I should say, were killed in a alleged plane crash over Russia. And I surmised that that was not exactly at the hands of Russia or Putin itself, but nonetheless, probably a retaliatory type of attack or strike by the hands of some folks out of Africa due to their involvement in that region. And I kind of still want to, hang on to that theory. And I know the media is showing, otherwise, naturally, to paint Putin as a, this horrible assassin, dictator, what have you. And this was his way of exacting revenge on, I can't say the guy's name, this, I don't know. You know who I'm talking about, though. So, getting revenge, in a sense, for this attempted coup that they're calling was an attempted coup. And even it's been already, acknowledged through Russian media that it was not exactly a coup attempt. It was more of a just, I'm going to embarrass you on the national stage by protesting and marching into Moscow type of thing. So I say all that to say this, that it's very intricate. It's a very intricate situation. And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that's being thrown up. And I will hope that, for those who are enjoying, following stuff like that, that you see through those smoke and mirrors and see through the media bias and media reporting techniques of trying to paint a narrative that's not true for what it is. I'm not saying that Putin didn't have anything to do with it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I think there was more than meets the eye to it. I believe that perhaps maybe, just maybe, there may have been a hand in all of that, in this guy's demise, in these folks' demise through the hands of some folks out of Africa. That is what I am getting at. Now, I don't know. I could, like I said, I could be totally wrong on this one. I could be. But from what I've been seeing, and I shared a video with my analysis. I shared a video to support my theory. So we'll see. But it is what it is. Folks, coming up in the next hour, we got David Quayle with Global Impact. Keep it locked right here on TECN.TV. And I will see you all. I'm going to jump out of here and give me something to eat because I'm starving. I'll see you all on Friday. God willing. God bless. Be safe. And, take it easy. You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com.